Hey folks, hope you're all doing well and welcome back to the channel. So I got an author on tonight, a gentleman that we've crossed paths a few times but never did a show together, so this will be a first. He's a fellow Canuck, he's from New Brunswick, and he's written a book on Night Ranger. So we're going to talk all about his book, this book and other books that he's written. And yeah, so I'd like to welcome Mr. Tim Durling. Hey Tim, how are you, man?
I'm doing good, Hack. Thanks for having me on.
Awesome. So full disclosure, I am not a huge Night Ranger person. Familiar with the hits as most people. In sort of trying to prepare for this show, I've been listening to a bunch of Night Ranger, and actually I was watching a concert of theirs in Chicago, a recent one from about 10 years ago with the new guitar player Kelly. Is it Kelly?
Kerry Kelly.
Kerry Kelly, yeah. And yeah, I mean, these guys all live, they've always been phenomenal. For me, the attraction really with Night Ranger, being a guitar player, is that, initially was that whole Brad Gillis, Jeff Watson pairing. And I mean, their solos, or these guys were just ripping stuff, and they were doing harmonies and stuff like that, which wasn't really that prevalent, in that sort of mid 80s part, it was kind of earlier on with Thin Lizzy, but it was nice for them to bring that back. But anyways, before we get into all of that, so the book. So what prompted you to write yourself a book on Night Ranger?
Well, I've always been a big fan, and I've always thought that they sort of got not short end of the stick, but they were never on top of the heap sort of thing. There were plenty of other bands that sold more. Even though Night Ranger had lots of hits and they had gold albums, platinum albums, and were well known, I just always thought there should be a brighter spotlight shined on them, and that's been the reason that I've done any of my books, really. And this is my 5th book overall. It's my 4th that I just write about one band or one artist, and to my knowledge, there's never been a book on Night Ranger before, and I think every classic band should have a book about them. There should be something that people can pick up and read and use as a reference guide, but also kind of read about what fans think of each of the albums. And also, in a lot of ways, this book is for folks like yourself. I mean, for folks that are curious about this band that never really dug in and checked them out, or had a couple of their records in the 80s, but they've never really stopped recording. I mean, since 2011, they've done 4 studio albums, and they're all really good. So I just thought, this should be an album by album type of book, a panel book. All of this is the 3rd panel book that I've done so far, and I've totally modeled them off after Martin Popoff's album by album books, because I like the idea of having a virtual like a bunch of people sitting around talking about a band or talking about a particular album, and I pose a question and just let them go, and whatever they think of. They can agree, they can disagree. We've got people of all age groups here, and this is the most the most people I've ever had in one book, the most panelists per chapter. I've got 10 people in each chapter. So it's a long book. It's almost 300 pages long. It's a pretty hefty read. You can just tell physically. If you put it up, if anybody's got the rest of my books, just put it up against the rest of them. It's way bigger. Yeah. So I wanted to do the book. I'm a big fan, and I didn't see any other books on them. And to me, just not enough people talk about Night Ranger, and how I think they're kind of a band that even if people know about them, they kind of take them for granted. They really are amazing, and they wrote great melodic rock songs. And you're absolutely right. I mean, when they came out in '82 with Dawn Patrol, the idea of twin lead guitars wasn't unique, but it weren't a lot of American bands doing it. There weren't a lot of
Yeah,
commercial bands doing it either. They're a unique combination of influences and sounds, but certainly, they had a lot of cred, even though they played, what you might call pop metal at times. They had a lot of cred with the guitar players because of Brad and Jeff, and especially Brad being part of Ozzy's band briefly.
yes. Speak of the
Um,
devil. Yeah,
but yeah, their solos are so amazing. They're so technically amazing, and yet usually you can hum them.
yeah,
They're always melody first, no matter what they're doing, whether it's a heavy song or whether it's a ballad.
yeah, yeah. Well, we'll get into that in a bit, but I just want to just so people are aware about the book a little bit more. So basically, what Tim is mentioning is so he got a really nice forward here. I should mention by Phil Ashton. That's really well written. And then basically, you're just going literally album by album, and then you pose a question, and you've got, like you said, about 10 people, and a lot of these names are familiar names. If you watch the Contrarians or maybe even see a Tranquility, you'll recognize a lot of these names. And they just basically comment on each song, and you just go that systematically from record to record through their entire catalog. I mean, again, being the guitar nerd that I am, what I really liked was a Sean Kelly bit. Sean Kelly, which is familiar to my channel. I interviewed him. He's been on my channel twice, but I interviewed him probably like 4 years ago, 3 4 years ago. Really cool dude, amazing freaking player. And yeah, where Sean Kelly goes through the the talks about the different guitar players and the different styles, and a couple of names that I wasn't aware of. And there's a picture of Sean Kelly. Joel Holkstra being in the band, which I wasn't aware of that incarnation. And then again, Kerry Kelly, who's currently playing with the band. And you've got some phenomenal photos here at the end. So it's a really well done package. Man, it must have been with here. Just going through these pictures, really really cool. Yeah, it must have been difficult, like hurting. It's like all these people
Well,
together and
yeah, I,
formulate all that.
it's a fun process, but it is work for sure. And so the first thing that I do when I do one of these is I come up with a series of questions for each album. And when I say questions, they're a lot of times they're just statements. You can
Yeah,
either agree or disagree with them. They're not yes and no questions. Then a lot of the times they're not even like with a question mark. They're more like this album shows a blah 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 blah. Discuss, and they do, it's just a matter of getting people that I know are big fans, or at least are curious enough that if I say, look, I need somebody to do these 4 albums, can you do that? And they go, yeah, I'll go listen to those.
yeah,
And Yeah, it was a honor getting Phil Aston. I was on Phil's show promoting my last book, which was on Sammy Hagar solo stuff. And Sean, I mean, Sean's a great guy. I've talked to Sean a lot. Sean wrote the foreword for my second book, which was
oh,
a
okay.
similar type of book as this, but it was on one of my favorite bands, Y&T. And
Mhm.
again, there's a band that never had a book written about them.
Yeah,
Um, but yeah, I talked to Sean, and he talks about how he first was familiar with Night Ranger, and one of my favorite parts of our interview is he said that before he even heard the song "Don't Tell Me You Love Me," he saw it transcribed in a guitar magazine, and he just said, "Look at all those notes, in the solo." So, and I knew that he had the cred, and he's met some of them briefly,
yeah,
um, but yeah, I wanted to cover all the eras of the band. I mean, the band to this date are 3/5 intact. You've still got Jack Blades on bass and vocals. You got Kelly Kagi on drums and vocals, and you got Brad Gillis on guitar. And currently, it's Eric Levy on keyboards and Kerry Kelly on the second guitar. So Joe
yeah.
Hoekstra was only in the band for a couple of albums, and then David Coverdale came calling, probably with a fatter paycheck. But the albums he was on were fantastic, and they're both like they had a lot to do with revitalizing the classic Night Ranger sound, but they've always had great musicians.
Well,
You
getting
know,
really nerdy about the guitar, I noticed that Kerry Kelly is playing Les Pauls, similar to what Jeff Watson used to play in the day, I guess, to kind of maintain the sound. But yeah, I was saying it to you earlier. I was watching a live show of theirs from, I think, the 2010s in Chicago, and yeah, 3/5 of the band. And this is a little bit of a, I don't know, something that kind of bothers me a little bit is when you have these classic bands and they're advertising them for shows and stuff. I did a quick little short on this a while ago, and you're hearing the songs on the advertisement. So it'd be like Nazareth, for example, and the
Yeah.
Nazareth hits and this and that. And then for the person that doesn't know and they're hearing Dan McCafferty and they're thinking, man, I'm going to see Dan McCafferty. I'm
Yeah.
going to hear, but it's not Dan McCafferty.
Or
I
pictures. I find that a lot too. They'll put
yeah,
a picture up. It's like, these aren't the same guys.
these aren't the same guys. They don't sound the same. It's false advertising. Like on the one hand, the fact that Nazareth, and this was their farewell, by the way, it's great that they're doing it, but they should really maybe put clips from actual shows in the commercials so people, oh, this is what they sound like now. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Or represent them as they are. Foreigner being the biggest culprit of
Oh yeah, yeah.
that.
Sometimes that's out of the band's control, but I know that as far as I can tell, any ads that I've seen, I think April Wine are doing it right. Like they're not.
Oh, are they?
You don't see any pictures of them with Miles Goodwin still,
Right.
But yeah, it's a fine line. But yeah, ideally, what you'd want would be current, more current live versions of the familiar songs. Probably what you watched is when ended up coming out as a CD and a DVD. It was their 35th anniversary show in Chicago. That would have been 2015, 2016.
Yeah, that sounds
a great show.
Yeah, it was great. Yeah,
I've only seen them once. It was a couple of years ago, and they're fantastic. They sound great.
Yeah. Well, like again, getting back to the point, like at least when you see Night Ranger, hey, you got the two guys.
You've got both singers,
and you got
one of the main guitar players. So yeah, that's more than a lot of classic bands can say. They get 60% of their, they got a passing grade on their original lineup.
Yeah, that's pretty good for these days. Okay, I would just say quick hi to a few people. Cushman joined us, Guitar Hack Universe, welcome. Yeah, like the guitar playing, Brad Gillis has always played. I can't believe it's the same guitar, but always it looks like the same. It's like a red, I believe it's a Strat with a black pickguard, and he was one of the first Floyd Rose guys.
Yeah,
he is to that. I mean, he doesn't get enough credit for that because he was one of the guys early on that was really using the whole Floyd thing as sort of part of his original sound, but not using it in a gimmicky way, like using it in a super musical way. And I love the, like, all, I mean, I'm again with Night Ranger, I tend to lean a little bit more on the heavier side of things. Like for me, I dig the first record, is really cool, and then they just started sort of, as the popular they get, for me, the more they peter out. But I'll mention an album to you here that you guys talked about yesterday here in a minute. But one thing, like, regardless of the pop or the heavy or whatever, like his solos, like as you mentioned, were always so musical, and him and Jeff Watson together, I mean, their stuff is, again, all the technical sort of flash and whatever, but lots of musicality there.
They stick in your head. They're like songs within songs.
Yeah.
And all anyone needs to do, as far as a good example of Brad really using that whammy bar to its maximum potential, their biggest hit, Sister Christian, that's a symphony on the whammy bar.
Yeah.
He had the feedback loop going, so he always had the note, but he uses it so tastefully in that. And, he's known as the king of the whammy. If anybody knows Brad Gillis, they call him the king of the whammy bar, the whammy bar king. And I mean, he's a great guitar player overall, but that's certainly what he's best known for. And yeah, he's still, I mean, when they got on stage, when I saw them, I'm like, there it is. There's that red and black Strat that he's always, it's weather-born. It's like, I mentioned Y&T before. I'm a big fan of it. Dave Menichetti still plays that beat up Sunburst. Les Paul, it's got the marks on it from this, hand resting on it all those years. It's like that's their instrument. And but yeah, Brad was an early adopter, and it's a very California thing, I think, because I think, obviously Eddie Van Halen kicked the door open, But
Yeah,
Brad was like, he took that to a different level, not necessarily better, but different. Every bit as technical, but
yeah,
he really put his own stamp on it.
yeah,
And Jeff, unfortunately, I'm not familiar with Jeff as much, um, as Brad, because he wasn't in the band as long, and he was sort of the quieter guy. But I mean, his stuff is amazing too. The eight fingered stuff. You listen to
yeah.
You Could
That
Still
was
Rock
his.
in
That was,
America. That's a good example of that.
yeah,
And all of them could write. All of them could contribute to the songwriting. Jack Blades wrote the majority of the songs, but they were all a very musical band, and whether they were heavy or whether they were doing a ballad or a more pop thing, like I said, always melody, always
yeah,
tons of melody, to the point where you could put out an album and you could say, well, I could hear almost any of these songs on some sort of radio station.
yeah, yeah. Hooks galore, right? Lots of hooks.
Yeah.
We
And
got
and I think it was the fact that, what I love about this band is it never sounded to me like it was forced. It never sounded like the record company saying you need to write certain types of songs, although they did get on their case
yeah,
once they had a hit with a ballad. But I think Night Ranger just wrote naturally upbeat, catchy songs. I think they just liked writing in that vein. And
happy, positive songs too.
the same thing, what I love about Night Ranger is the same thing I love about Triumph. Their songs
Yeah,
are anthemic,
exactly.
and they're upbeat, and they're motivation in some ways. They're motivational. They're not down in the dumps. Night Ranger is not a band that does dour.
No, no. I just wanted to mention Joe DeLenza joined us, Blue Mox joined us, and Guitar Talk Universe wasn't Brad the second guy to get a Floyd. I heard that. Yeah, he was a very early adopter. I don't know if he was number two. I guess number one would have been Eddie, but that's very possible.
Yeah, probably. I mean, that would make sense that he would be, among the first five. I really don't know. And it's interesting too, because the how, like Dawn Patrol is a pretty rocking album, um, but the roots of Night Ranger, Jack and Brad, and then eventually Kelly, but Jack and Brad on record were in a band called Rubicon in the late 70s. And that was a band formed by Jerry Martini, who came from Sly and the Family Stone.
Right.
And it sounded a lot more like Sly and the Family Stone than it did anything hard rock. So sometimes I wonder, where did that sound come from? You know
The
what I mean? Like it's an
pop.
interesting combination of influences, because it was something that I've always said about Night Ranger is that I've always considered them sort of on their own as far as melodic sort of rock goes, especially bands from the 80s, because they weren't hard rock, say like Def Leppard or
No.
Whitesnake or Van Halen, but they weren't like Journey or Foreigner or REO Speedwagon either. They were somewhere in between. They looked more hard rock, but they had that pop sensibility, that that
Yeah.
that knack for hooks, but yet they had the guitar pyrotechnics. Very unique sound. I think there's a it through the vocal sounds, and it through the guitars, but Night Ranger has a sound that to me doesn't really sound that much like anybody else. I can pick out influences, but I can hear a bit of music and say, well, that sounds like Night Ranger.
Yeah. Yeah. Triumph is a good. I mean, later Triumph, like Sport of Kings Triumph, Thunder 7 Triumph. Yeah, that maybe.
Well, some might say, and I happen to like those albums too, but some might say though they were sort of under duress to write that style by the time they got there, because those aren't like Allied Forces or Just a
Yeah,
Game.
exactly. Yeah.
But Night Ranger just came about it naturally, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, that's a whole other show, but yeah, there was a lot of bands in that period. Like, Heart comes to mind. That was sort of, you got to keep, let's get on the radio and let's kind of smooth things out. And then Kiss did Crazy Nights. And those are all
Yeah,
albums.
and I also think that Night Ranger influenced a lot of bands that came after them. A
Yeah.
lot of the hard rock bands that made it really big in the mid to late 80s, and I don't think I've ever heard anybody credit Night Ranger as an influence, but I think that they were.
Yeah. 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 Well, it was always kind of weird to me too when I'd see them. And I mean, just, watching that video again, Kelly Keege's, that guy's got a voice like, I
Oh,
mean,
so much soul in his voice, and he still
amazing.
sounds great.
He's still, and what always threw me was he's the only drummer I've ever seen that hasn't been dead center, like up.
Yeah, he turns his drum kit sideways so he can.
Yeah, he's always on the side so he can
They
face the.
did not too long ago. They did a show. Oh, in Vegas, I think there was a club that was closing down. Why is the name escaping me? It was Count something or other. Somebody out there must know. But because of the size of the stage, they had to set his drum set up in the conventional way.
Right.
But in the case of Night Ranger, it looks funny to
Yeah.
have it set up exactly facing the audience dead on. It's like, that doesn't look right, even though that's the way 99.9% of drummers play.
Yeah. That I always thought that weird, and even the kind of his posture, like to play and kind of look this way while you're playing, is kind of. I mean, I don't play drums, but I can imagine that's not the most natural.
He must have just gotten that. Must have just been how he developed, because it can't be an easy thing, because I mean, it takes so much effort just to do one or the other, to sing,
sing,
or play. And that's another thing that I think is unique about Night Ranger, is just the lineup of the band. It's not your typical lineup where you've got, like, say, a front man, maybe a guitar player, either a second guitar player, keyboard player, bass player, drummer. Your bassist and your drummer, your rhythm section, are your vocalists.
Yeah.
And that's unique. I can't think of too many bands that are set up quite like that. And yet you've got two guitar players and then a keyboard player.
Yeah. That is a little weird. I got a question for you, just out of curiosity, again, because I'm not all that familiar with the history of the band, but why is Jeff Watson AOL, like, or
why
is he back? What happened
there? What happened with Jeff was, I'm not really sure. I know it was around 2007, and an album called Hole in the Sun, which if you read the chapter on that, you'll find that it's a lot of folks' least favorite Night Ranger album, because I hear a lot of anger and aggression on that album, and I think it's a reflection of how they were getting along or not getting along. I think there were a lot of philosophical differences, but probably more than anything, what do most musicians fight about? Money. What percentage of the name does everybody have? I think it had a lot to do with that. And whatever it was, he left, and there's never been any reconciliation. So whatever it is ran deep, unfortunately.
I watched, like I was saying to you earlier, I watched the bit of your discussion with Grant yesterday about the book, and you guys both went on about a record called, that is an unofficial Night Ranger record, because I think only two of them are on there. Feeding
Off the Mojo. So 1995.
I listened to that, and I'm telling you, I fucking love that record. It is really, really
good album. It's a really good album, and the comparison I always make is that it's their version of the 1994 Motley Crue album with John Corabi on vocals.
Yeah.
Which I've gone on record. I've been on the contrarian saying that's my favorite Motley Crue album. Ooh. I think it's a fantastic album.
Yeah, it is, but
even though it doesn't sound like who it says it is on the cover.
Yeah.
Well, in the case of Feeding Off the Mojo, it's half and half, because when Kelly sings a vocal, it sounds like Night Ranger.
Yeah.
But Gary Moon, who they had on bass and vocals on that album, sounds nothing like Jack Blades. Oh. And of course, we know, the reason that album came out when it did, and Jack's not on it. He'd gone through the Damn Yankees thing.
Yeah.
He was doing Shaw Blades with just Tommy, the acoustic duo. That's what was going on. But Brad Gillis and Kelly Kagi obviously had the name. So they got Gary Moon, and he's got more of a, when I hear him sing, he reminds me a lot of Tom Kiefer from Cinderella. And to keep it Canadian, he reminds me of the late Jerry McGee from Brighton Rock. Really raspy. Sometimes he sounds like Kip Winger or maybe a little Mark Slaughter. But it's a fantastic album at a time when
he's got the rasp, but
when that came out, I was excited. I'm glad I read about it, because it got no publicity. I think I read about it in Metal Edge, but there were no good melodic rock albums coming out at that time. It was all grunge and alternative, and I hated that stuff. So it was a welcome thing. It's like, I don't care if this doesn't necessarily sound like Night Ranger. I think this is a good album.
Well, I'll tell you, the guitar playing on that record is absolutely phenomenal. If you're a guitar fan, because that's what I noticed about it, I
Yeah.
mean, it's a guitar heavy, and his playing and his note choice and all his breaks and the riffs and Gary Moon's voice. Again, I look Jack Blades and the original Night Rangers, but is great. But if they did another couple of records, I would have been into that band.
Well, the thing is, the interesting thing about that is some people call that Moon Ranger, right? Like as a nickname.
Yeah, yeah,
Um, there are other songs that didn't make the album because they've been demoing songs for most of the early '90s, and some of the songs ended up on one of Brad's solo albums. One of them ended up on Kelly's solo album. So you can kind of piece things together with that. But I like the fact that they had this. A lot of bands, a lot of classic bands, any band that's got any amount of catalog, most of them have at least one album that you would call an outlier for one reason or another.
yeah,
Sounds nothing else like anything else they've done, or it's a really weird lineup. This is Night Rangers. So yeah, they don't even count it because in '98 they put an album out called Seven, which is actually their 8th album. But you know, Jack's not on it, so it's there. It sits. It'll probably never be reissued, but it's got. There are some people that say, "Oh, if it's not Jack, it's not Night Ranger. I don't even want to hear it." You got to listen to it anyway, and just forget that it says Night Ranger on it. Just listen
yeah.
to it as a good melodic, but
Exactly.
hard rock album. But it's got some
Take
heavy
it
stuff
for
on
what
it.
it is. Take it for what it is, because it's just
It's
a
really good.
Yeah. So like someone like myself was maybe more into not so much the pop but leanings, but more to the heavier leanings. If you were to say, okay, here's the heaviest Night Ranger album to listen to, which one would you pick out of the bunch?
I think that I would send them in the direction of Man in Motion from 1988, which was the last album they did for MCA. I've called that my favorite Night Ranger album.
Okay.
Alan Fitzgerald, the keyboard player, had left at this point. They eventually got back together for a while. But on that album, they were just a 4-piece. And there are keyboards on the album, like studio keyboard players.
Right.
But they're not written into the songs so much. It's
Okay.
pretty guitar heavy.
Okay.
There are songs on there like the title song, like Love Shot Me Down, Halfway to the Sun, Right on You. That's a guitar heavy Night Ranger album. It's still a melodic, it's not metal, but it's good hard rock,
Right.
good sounding album. It was produced by Keith Olsen. Unfortunately, it hit the delete bins almost as soon as it came out. MCA didn't do a thing to promote it, but I would say, yeah, check that album out. And as far as the mainstream, their well-known album, that first album, Dawn Patrol, is got some pretty heavy duty stuff. Like Eddie's Coming Out Tonight and Play Rough, and the song called Night Ranger, like that's pretty rocking stuff too.
That one kind of leans a little more towards the heavier rock. Like that album, I of the ones I've heard, I mean, except for Feeding the Mojo, those two in the first one, or that one in the first, and Feeding Your Mojo and Dawn Patrol, those are the ones I like the best. But I haven't checked out Man in Motion.
I think you'd like Man in Motion, and if somebody wants to hear a great latter day Night Ranger album that sounds every bit as good as their classic stuff, I would always say start with Somewhere in California, which came out in 2011, because that is classic Night Ranger. And it gives you, if you're a Joel Hoekstra fan, that's one of the ones he's on. I would say check that one out.
Now, Man in Motion, that's without Jeff Watson, right?
No, Jeff Watson's on that.
Oh, he's on that. Okay,
yeah,
cool.
Yeah. So Jeff Watson was, with the exception of Feeding Off the Mojo. See, the original 5-piece Night Ranger got back together in '96.
Oh, okay. All right.
They did 2 albums, Neverland in 1997 and Seven in 1998. Those were the last 2 to feature the original 5-piece lineup. After that, Alan Fitzgerald left for good, the keyboard player, and eventually Jeff Watson left after that Hole in the Sun album. So there was a long gap between albums. So Seven came out in 1998. Hole in the Sun didn't come out until 2007. And then Somewhere in California came out in 2011. So in the first decade of the 2000s, there's only one Night Ranger album. And it's kind of a confusing album. Jeff Watson, you can almost look at the writing credits and see what was going on in the band. Jeff Watson only has 2 writing credits. their sole writing credits, and they're both tacked on the end of the album. So I doubt they were even in the same studio at the same time.
Right, right,
They
right.
sound, it sounds very fragmented. But I think they had to get that album out of their system, because after that, I think they've been on quite a roll. They, the last album they put out was 4 years ago, and I hope they do another one.
Yeah, it's cool when legacy bands are still putting out good stuff. I mean, Styx, the recent records are still good. Saxon just put out a great record a year or two ago. The Judas Priest was
That's
fantastic.
another reason why I wanted to do a book on a band like Night Ranger, because they're actually putting out new music. I mean, a lot of it, it's only the diehard fans that even know about it or go out and buy it. But I love the fact that they're doing it anyway, and it's really good. That's the same reason I did a book about Kansas, because their last two albums are as good as anything they've ever done. So I think that more people need to pay attention to newer stuff from these veteran bands, because we won't always have them.
That's true. That's true. Let's just say
Let's
hello
get as
to
much music out of them as we can.
let's say hello to a few more people. We got Wayne McConnell's in here. Jimmy Biter, how are you? And Joe makes a comment. Yeah, and he's absolutely on the money. Brad Gillis doesn't get nearly as much love as he deserves. Yeah.
If anybody remembers the Hearing Aid Stars,
Yeah. The deal thing. Yeah.
all of those solos, I love listening to that extended guitar solo. To me, Brad's the star of that, and it's his whammy bar. It's his
Yeah.
whammy bar that stands out. After that part of the solo, everything else is a letdown.
A letdown.
That's the peak.
Yeah. All right. Well, again, we're talking about Tim's book, See Me Away, the Night Ranger album review. And you mentioned some other books that you'd worked on. By the way, any of these books are available on Amazon. All you have to do is go to Amazon and type in Tim Durling, and they will all appear. So what other books have you got going besides this one, Tim?
So my first book was called Unspooled, An Adventure in 8 Tracks. That was a really fun book. It's a coffee table book, and it's part of it charts the history of the 8-track throughout the 1980s, which is not a decade people associate with that format. But if you were a member of Columbia House, particularly in the US, you'll know they made them all the way through 1988. And I don't think it had ever been chronicled before. So I did that. Our friend Martin Popoff wrote the foreword for that one. That one started as a Kickstarter project, but we moved it over to Amazon once it realized you could put books out through Amazon, which really saves with shipping and publishing and all of that stuff. Then from then on, it's basically been books about one band or one artist. So then I did Down for the Count, the Y&T album review. That's my best-selling book to date. That one's done really well. I had the pleasure of having the one and only Hugh Syme design the book cover for that, which was an absolute honor. Then I did Kansas book, Let It Be Your Guide, the Kansas album review. That was a panel discussion. My last book was on Sammy Hagar's solo career, called Red on Black. That one's all me. I wrote that one myself. And now I've got the Night Ranger one, and I've got 3 others that are in various forms of that I'm working on now. So I've always got something on the go. But people that know me and have watched my channel, they kind of know the bands that I love, and a lot of people are really good, whether they know it or not, at trying to predict who I'm going to do a book on next. So it's just a matter of time.
Yeah, I should mention also the link to Tim's YouTube channel is down below if you want to check it out. Yeah, and then Tim, yeah, just talk about your channel here for a minute for folks if like.
Yeah, thanks. I've had the Tim's Vinyl Confessions now since August of 2014. The fact it's called Tim's Vinyl, Kansas have an album called Vinyl Confession, so that should give you an idea of how big a fan I am. I just thought it had a ring to it too, and to put my name on it. It's just me talking about the music that I love, and it's just been growing steadily over the years. I'll do album reviews when something new comes out, or I'll go through if here's all the cassettes by a certain group that I like or whatever. We do a lot of countdown shows, and people like those ones where we'll take an old chart. This was the top 100 Billboard Top 100 this week in 1985, or something like that. We do a lot of those ones too. And the cool thing is, since the advent of Zoom, I've been able to get a lot more guests on, so we don't have to be in the same location. So that's worked really well. I've had Sean Kelly on my show a couple. I think I've had Sean Kelly on a couple of times.
Yeah.
I've had a couple of the guys from Y&T on, Aaron Lee and John Nyman. I talked to Tom Brislin from Kansas, so I've been very fortunate. We had Andy Curran on the show once.
Nice.
But yeah, I do 3 new episodes every weekend. And if people just go to timsvinylconfessions.com, I kind of rent that URL so somebody doesn't take it. That takes you right to the YouTube page.
Cool. All righty. Are we ready to wrap this up? Anything else you wanted to mention, Tim?
No, just thanks for having me on. Thanks for everybody that's tuned in tonight. And, check this band out. And, but I will say that this book is a handy guide to give you an idea of what you're going to get with each album. So if you like stuff that's on the melodic side, it'll show you what albums that you're more likely to like. If you like the guitar heavy stuff, it'll do that too.
Cool. I just want to mention to the folks, if you want to help support this channel, the links are below. Look for a live stream on Saturday. I haven't done my 5,000 subscriber celebration, so that's going to happen Saturday. I'll be posting that event soon. So I want to thank everybody for watching. I want to thank Tim. Tim, hang on for a second. And we'll catch you all next time. Take care, everybody. Cheers.